Hello, ladies. Happy Wednesday. I hope you're having a great week so far. Give it just a second or two, see if anybody's going to hop on. We are talking today. This is part 2 of getting started with strength training. We're going to talk today about warm-ups and stretches and what else are we talking about? Oh, what exercises to do first, and then also a little bit about how to choose the correct weight for any exercise. So give it 1 second here, make sure everybody's in who's going to be in. I know that this is kind of a weird time sometimes. A lot of y'all are at work, huh? I'm hoping to change this time in the future once I get a little bit of some other things I have going on open up. I'm hoping to move this more into the evenings. So maybe once people are done with work, more of you can get on. So, okay. Well, let's get rolling here. So getting started with strength training, I want to start by talking about warm-ups and stretching. So there are 2 terms that I want you to know that will help you determine how to do this or what to do. The 2 terms are dynamic stretching or dynamic warm-up, and then the other is called static stretching. And so in this particular environment, scenario, whatever you want to call it, dynamic stretching, dynamic basically means movement and static means still. So before your workouts, you want dynamic. We want movement before our workouts. After our workouts, once our muscles are warm, then we want static or still. So keep those 2 things in mind as we go forward here. So before the workout, you want movement and dynamic. After the workout, you want static and still. So before your workout, think about what specific movements your lifts for that day are going to require you to do. And you want to essentially mimic some of those movements. So for example, if it's leg day, maybe, and you're squatting, you want to think about, when I squat, what joints and what things are moving in my squat. I know I'm going to be having some hip movement. I know I have knee movement. I know I have ankle movement. So we have 3 joints that are involved in a squat. So in your warm-ups, in your dynamic warm-up or dynamic stretching, you want to think about those 3 joints. So you might want to do some hip focused dynamic warm-up. So again, movement, not still stretching, not static stretching. We want to be movement. So think about hip openers. For example, there's things called gate openers, where basically you're standing and you lift up your knee, you open the gate, put your foot down, lift your foot up, close the gate, put the foot down. So you're opening and working on that hip. Whoops, I'm knocking over water bottles. So you want to work on getting those hips opened up, because you'll be using your hips in squats. You might want to think about doing some ankle mobility. Those are much harder for me to describe in this space, but you can Google that or look that up on Instagram. Some ankle mobility exercises to work on getting that ankle moving and so on. I would definitely add in some body weight squats before you do weighted squats, just to make sure you get all 3 of those joints moving. You want to feel out. So I always recommend doing body weight movements and empty bar movements before you do any heavy loaded movement. So like if you're doing barbell, always start with an empty bar. I don't care how much you lift. I don't care how strong you are. Always start with an empty bar, because you want to work your way through that movement and make sure that that specific movement is feeling good for that specific day. If there's anything that feels kind of wonky or weird, you want to address that before you load weight on the bar. So always start either body weight or in both empty barbell or very, very light dumbbells. So like, for example, on my squat days, I always do body weight squats before I even touch a barbell. Then I do barbell only squats before I add weight. So it should be a progression. And always, always, always feel out that specific movement, light or no weight, before you add any weight to it, because you just never know what kind of, especially as we get older. Y'all, I'm over 40, so you never know what might happen. So definitely if you're going to be squatting, do some body weight squats. You get all 3 joints moving. If body weight squats literally are your workout, which is possible, I would then maybe start with like box squats, where you're just essentially sitting and standing, just making sure that everything is moving correctly and everything feels good. So if you notice any pain at all, like in your hips or in your low back, then you might want to spend some extra time on some of those hip opening exercises. If you know that you struggle to hit depth when you squat, then in your warm-up, you might want to spend more time paying attention to the ankle mobility and your hip mobility. So it really varies person to person, but notice before the workout, there's absolutely no point where we're just sitting down and stretching our muscles. That should not happen before a workout. That should always be saved for after your workout, when your muscles are warm and they're in the optimal position to get really great stretches once they're warmed up. So look into some things like after the workout, like yoga poses, like pigeon stretches, what the heck is it called? Child's pose. Some of these other things that are really great, particularly for the back areas where we tend to get a lot of pain when we're lifting. And then don't be shy, don't be afraid to throw in some of those old school tried and true stretches, like touch your toes, things like that. Butterfly stretches are great. All of these are really great movements to do after your muscles are warmed up at the end of your workout. So we should not do static stretching before, static stretching at the end, dynamic warm-ups in the beginning where we're just running through movements. We're getting our joints warm and running through the movement of the day. Also, when you're doing your stretches at the end, hold your stretches steady for as long as is comfortable. There should not be bouncing in your stretches. That's called ballistic stretching. And there's a lot of really conflicting data and research out there about if ballistic stretching is actually valuable or oftentimes can cause injury, like make things worse than any benefit that you're getting from them. So I always recommend holding stretches steady, no bouncing up and down, and only hold for as long as is comfortable and only stretch down as far as is comfortable. Don't push it too far just for the sake of pushing a stretch. And then finally, one thing I want to point out that with stretching, we don't do them prior to the workout because there is some research indicating that that actually causes injury in the workout when we're lifting. Now, if you're doing cardio, things like that, that's sort of a different story. So all of this suggestions are all around strength training. So when we stretch prior to lifting, it is possible that we may end up with some muscles overly stretched and they're unable to hold the position that they need to be in through the lift to keep you safe. So there's a little bit of research on that. So that's why static stretching is saved for the end. Dynamic movement is saved for the beginning, or we do it in the beginning. So, all right. Now, you're warmed up. You know what to do. You know what you're going to do before your workout. You know what you're going to do after your workout. Now, what about the actual workout? So what should you do? How do you choose your exercises and how do you know what to do first? So 2 more terms I'm going to teach you today. One of them is compound movement and the other is accessory movement. So compound movements are anything that includes more than one joint. So going back to the squat example from earlier, when we squat, we are using our hip, our knee, and our ankle, right? We talked about that earlier. So we have 3 joints that are in action during a squat. That makes a squat a compound movement. And then an example of an accessory movement might be a bicep curl. In a bicep curl, your elbow is kept to your side and you're only bending at the elbow. So that is only one joint. That makes it an accessory movement, a single joint exercise. So for anyone who is new to lifting, and really anyone whose goal is strength or even muscle growth, I always suggest doing your compound movements first in your workout. So you want to think about, okay, what's my workout entail? What am I doing? And then think, literally even do the movement. What joints are in action when I do this movement? Is it more than one joint or is it only one joint? If it's more than one, those should be at the beginning of your workout. If it is only one, we put those towards the end of the workout. So particularly, there's a couple of reasons for this, particularly if you are maybe running short on time, maybe you only have 45 minutes to do a workout, 100% do those compound movements first because your more muscle groups are working in that movement. So you are hitting more muscles all at once in a shorter amount of time. So that's one reason we do that. Secondly is that we don't want to fatigue our muscles in our body before the compound movements. Because they use multiple joints and multiple muscles, they are more tiring than an accessory movement. So if we do accessory movements first and tire out our muscles, then we go and try to do our compound movement, you're not going to be able to lift as much weight. You're just going to be tired. So it's a safety thing that we want to make sure we're being safe, but also those compound movements, being that they use multiple muscles, we want those to be the ones where we can do the most weight in that exercise. So we don't want to be tired by an accessory movement before we get to the compound movements. Okay, so here's an example again for leg day. You might have squats first. We just said that's 3 joints in a squat. Then you might move on to a secondary compound movement like leg press. If you're doing a leg press, your hips and your knees are both moving. So 2 joints makes it compound. So we have squats, then you might go to leg press. After leg press, you might grab a few accessory things like maybe laying hamstring curls where it's just your knee moving up and down, some calf raises. So it's just your ankle moving for your calf. That makes it accessory. And then maybe like a leg extension where you're seated and you're lifting up the weight with it's on your ankle and you're lifting up the weight straight ahead with your legs. That is just a knee movement. So that is an accessory. So when you're building a workout, think about doing your main lift. In this case, it's the squat. Then a secondary lift. So it's maybe another compound. In this case, it was the leg press, and then 3 to 4 accessories that use only 1 joint, depending on the day. And also think about if you have any specific areas that you really want to focus on. Like maybe you'd really love to grow your quads. So when you choose those accessories, you might want to use exercises that'll grow your quads. Maybe you're just really ready to be jacked with your biceps. You might want to do an extra couple of different bicep exercises instead for your accessories. So generally I like to try and be well-rounded and hit all of the muscles in an area. But you absolutely, if you notice that, you would just like to grow a certain body part more, or if you notice that there's just a certain muscle that's particularly weak, you might want to focus on that by doing a couple of extra, accessories that hit that specific muscle. But your main lift, your secondary lift, so maybe another compound. It doesn't always have to be another compound. It could be just a bunch of accessories if you want, but I generally pick a main one and then a secondary, and then 3 to 4 accessory lifts depending on you and depending on the body part and depending on what you want to work on. So now we've covered warm-ups in the beginning. We're stretching at the end. Now we know what exercise we want to do. So now the question is, how do I know how much weight to choose on these exercises that I've just picked out? So this is a pretty short explanation for this one. This is not the most popular answer, but it's for real. It just is what it is. Literally just grab a weight and find out. You just want to see how it goes. You never know. So you're going to grab a weight. You're going to do the exercise. If you're able to complete the set with all of your reps with very good form, then either that's a great weight for you or that weight is too light. If you're not able to finish the set with good form, then you need to go backwards. That weight is too heavy. You want to choose a lighter weight. We talked about how to choose reps and sets in part 1 of Getting Started with Strength Training. So if you need a refresher on that, go ahead back and watch part 1 that I did a couple weeks ago. So if your form is great and you're able to do the whole entire set, maybe 10 reps, whatever it is, then you want to think, was it too easy or is this just right? I like to judge, is it too easy or is it just right, by asking, I ask the ladies in the gym all the time, on a scale of 1 to 10, how did that feel by the end? If they're telling me it felt like a 5 or a 6, that's too light. If you're feeling like it's maybe a 7, 8, or 9, that might be a pretty good weight to stay there for now, temporarily. And then once that weight starts feeling like a 5, 6, 7, I would probably go up. When you hit an 8 or a 9, that's usually a good place to stop. Now, every once in a while, there is definitely some benefit to going to failure, meaning you want to choose a weight that by your 10th or 8th or whatever you have, that rep, you finish it and you cannot do another single rep. There's definitely benefit to pushing yourself to the point where you cannot do any more. But the key is that you have to have good form throughout. We don't want you shaking your body and twisting and whatever. That's how you end up pulling a muscle or something. So you want to choose a weight where you feel like it's about an 8 or a 9 out of 10. Every once in a while, go for a 10 out of 10, or just keep going until you fail. That's totally fine. And there is definitely some benefit in muscle growth. I can't talk. Muscle growth to doing that strategy. So also, just a heads up, if you're new to strength training, you are going to find that in the beginning, you are able to add weight very, very quickly. That is super normal. We call those newbie gains. I've talked about them before in previous lives. It is super duper normal in the beginning where you're like jumping up weight like crazy. You're like, well, I didn't know I was this strong. And you're just adding more weight, adding more weight. There will absolutely, positively, 100% come a time where you hit a wall and you haven't been able to add weight in weeks, maybe even months sometimes. That's totally normal. That's absolutely expected. Don't let that get you down. Don't get disappointed or frustrated. That is perfectly normal. Imagine if we could always just keep going up in weight. At this point, I would be like lifting 1,000,000 pounds by now. So it's totally normal, and it's absolutely expected that you will at some point stop being able to grab the next size weight. But that just means we work on it. We tweak some things a little bit. You either just keep going, maybe you add a couple of reps, we change the tempo. So you're going really, really slow. That puts a lot of tension on the muscles to help it grow. There's lots of different things you can do at that point, but that's for another live. So, but just know that it's going to happen and don't get frustrated. Stick with it and you will absolutely get it. Okay, so part 3 of this series, and it will be our last part in the series, is going to be in a couple of weeks. We're going to talk about what shoes are best for lifting. That question comes up quite a bit. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about nutrition with lifting, how to fuel before your workout and after your workout in the best way possible. So those are things we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. So make sure you RSVP for those if you haven't already. And if you have any questions at all that about what we've talked about today, or any other questions that I've not covered yet, go ahead and put those in the comments so I can make sure that I get those into a live coming up, or I may even just answer it right in the comments for you. But I hope you all have a super duper awesome great day, and go lift some weights. I'll see you later.